it is important that we not recruit leaders, but we actually attract leaders. And the reason for that is when we recruit leaders, and especially if we recruit leaders that God is not specifically calling and working in them, then we've got to keep recruiting and keep calling them. Because if their engagement in the work and their involvement in the work depends on us and depends on what they've received from us, then we're going to have to constantly re-up that vision cast and continue to recruit and continue to exhort all of those pieces. Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the H3X Podcast, where I, Mark Gearing, together with your host, Dave Miller, explore the head, the heart, and the hands of the multiplying church and her leaders. And I want to jump into a topic in today's episode of talking about how to attract multiplying leaders. And if you have been listening to this podcast for any length of time, or even if you're new with us, this is something that we talk about a lot, is just the focus on identifying and developing leaders in the work, because it's really important that if we are chasing after a big vision that is God's vision, Genesis to Revelation, and we're going to see this big vision happen, that every nation and every people and place will be not only engaged with the gospel, but we'll see a sustained gospel presence that will lead to the return of Christ, where in Revelation 7, every tongue, every tribe, every nation, every geography, and every people group are represented standing before the throne. If we're going to see that happen, it's going to require a significant work of God, number one, but it's going to require a lot of multiplication that will be sustained and happen through the raising up and the multiplying of leaders. That has got to be a focus. So as we talk about this work, there's a lot of different pieces that we could focus on and talk about that it will take to get the job done. But in doing that, we've got to really focus in on how do we attract these kind of leaders. And that's even a key piece that I want to talk about before I jump into these 5 ways to attract multiplying leaders, because it is important that we not recruit leaders, but we actually attract leaders. And the reason for that is when we recruit leaders, and especially if we recruit leaders that God is not specifically calling and working in them, then we've got to keep recruiting and keep calling them. Because if their engagement in the work and their involvement in the work depends on us and depends on what they've received from us, then we're going to have to constantly re-up that vision cast and continue to recruit and continue to exhort all of those pieces. But if that leader has been called into the work by God, and they've been drawn to us and want to learn from us as leaders, then we can reference and point them to that calling from God. And so there's a powerful story by a movement catalyst named Bruce Carlton that Dave and I will talk about a lot on this podcast, where when he was engaging in the work over in Southeast Asia, he got on the field through the organization he was a part of, and they were exhorting and challenging him even to go and recruit these leaders that were there, and said, hey, you got to get a team and you got to bring these leaders to you. And he resisted this, and together with his wife Gloria, they ended up not doing that and actually engaging in the work, and God began to bring them to him instead. And so rather than him recruiting them, God brought him leaders, and those are the leaders that sustained the move of God that God did through that work. So we need to talk about how to attract those kind of leaders, because if that all kind of sets it up for you to want to know those 5 things, hopefully it does, that we need to attract those kind of leaders, and we need multiplying leaders if we're going to see the big vision that God has called us to be stewards of in the Bible, in these many places that we could reference, whether it's Malachi 1:11, Matthew 28, whether it's that Revelation 7:9. God wants to see all nations, and to get there, it's going to be through the multiplying of disciples and leaders. So let's talk about these 5 things. And I'm going to reference where we see this in the life of Jesus, because Jesus is the master disciple maker and the master at attracting multiplying leaders and then keeping them. So number 1, we see a compelling vision cast. And you could even say an elevator pitch in the life of Jesus. And we see him calling people to follow him, and he does that through a compelling vision cast. So Mark 1, he says, "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men." Clearly, Jesus has already got a reputation at this point in the region where he's been gospeling, he's been sharing. And so as he's engaging with these fishermen on the seashore, "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men," that vision cast is not just the words that he's saying, but there is a compelling example that he's already been engaging in that region that they are wanting to be a part of. And so they see him to be the Messiah, and so there's that dynamic of some of their expectations of what that means. But he's calling them into a kind of work, and I envision him continuing to walk after that point. "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men." It's clear. Follow me, that's what I'm inviting you into, and become fishers of men. So there's a compelling vision cast that he continues to put out there. And so then in Mark 3, as he's calling these leaders out from the crowd, Mark 3:13, he calls them that they might be with him, they might send them out to preach and to cast out demons. And so he's still on target with that same vision cast. Follow me, so be with me. And then fish, he sends them out to preach and to cast out demons. So there's these two main things that he calls them to. So if we are going to attract the right kind of leaders, we've got to be able to communicate a compelling vision cast that's clear, that's succinct, that communicates where we're going and where that person fits into it. So I like that phrase, elevator pitch. If you can communicate from, I like the idea of lost to leader or lost to laborer. If you can clearly and communicate in a compelling way, you are much more likely to attract the multiplying leader. Somebody who's maybe not multiplying now, but they've got the potential for being the kind of leader that will lay down their life for this vision. If they can understand what that vision is that they're signing on for and what their place is in it, then you can begin to work with that kind of leader. So you need to be able to communicate a compelling vision cast that will attract that kind of leader. Number 2, you need to be doing the work. So you can see here, just even in this number 1, that Jesus was probably out in the region doing the work that he was calling them into. So if we're going to attract those kind of leaders that are going to be a multiplier in the work, we want to call them into something that we're actually modeling ourselves. Because then we're actually showing them, number 1, that we've got alignment with the message that we are calling them into and the vision that we're calling them into. We're not calling them into something that we are not practicing ourselves. There should be some alignment there. My friend Lee Wood, he puts it this way: you can't give away what you don't possess. And so unless we are doing the work that we're calling them into, we can't give it away. So Jesus, to bring it back to that, he was doing that. So he was shoulder to shoulder with these leaders in the work, even after that point, doing it with them and calling them into something that he already was actually modeling. And so he did a lot of with-ness. I like that phrase. And so he was with his disciples. He was with them in the houses, with them as he's modeling, casting out demons, with them going into the synagogue, a whole lot of with-ness. And we should be doing the same thing. So number 1, compelling vision cast. Number 2, doing the work with our disciples. Okay, so number 3, there was a clarity in the development pathway with Jesus. Now, we don't get line by line what that was, but we definitely get clarity of him saying, "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men." So this is not just about come and serve my vision and just help me to do something. He's actually inviting them into a development process. So the kind of leaders that we need and we are looking for in the work that will have the capacity and the potential for multiplication are those that they want to grow, they want to develop. If we're going to find those high capacity catalytic leaders, those kinds of leaders that can multiply disciples, leaders in churches, they don't want to just come and jump in and just sit on the sideline. They actually want to, they're usually those type of leaders that are going to want to grow and develop and continue to develop. So we need to be able to communicate a clarity of a pathway for development for those kinds of leaders. And so to do that, we need to have clarity of what does it look like, not only to go from lost to leader or lost to laborer, like I was saying, but also for that leader that then is emerging to vision cast to them how they can continue to develop. And so it's understanding what does their role look like in the work initially, and then you're also kind of always pushing to the next step. You always got to think a step ahead with those leaders. If you're going to continue to attract those kind of leaders and keep those leaders, you've got to be able to vision cast where they're going in their development. So that's number 3, clarity of a leadership development pathway. Jesus had that. We need to have that too. Okay, so let's go on to a 4th one in this list. And so we need to be able to model, assist, watch, and launch leaders. If we are going to attract multiplying leaders, it's going to require usually a shift in their way of thinking, and it's going to require them to rework how they think about their primary focus in the kingdom and how they go about. Maybe they're already making disciples, but those disciples aren't multiplying. There's going to be a process that they're going to need to go through in their development to get to a place where they're seeing multiplication. So in that, we need to be able to model, assist, watch, and launch leaders to get them from maybe being a leader that can attract. They're going to be a gatherer. If you're going to be working with a multiplying leader, they're going to be able to gather people together, but they need to have a pathway where they can grow from being a gatherer to a multiplier. So that's pretty important that we're able to do that. And to do that, we need to be able to model, assist, watch, and launch key skills in each of the fields of the 4 fields or 5 parts of kingdom growth to be able to pour deeply into those that will obey no matter what the cost, but to do it in such a way that gives them real clarity of what that looks like in each of those parts of how the kingdom grows. So let's dig into this. So with Jesus, he did engaging, gospeling, disciple making, church planting or gathering together with those that he's pulling together as disciples, and then leadership development. He did those 5 parts, but he not only did them, but he actually modeled, assist, watched, and launched his multiplying leaders through those processes. And so we see Jesus engaging through. So if you go back to Mark chapter 1 and 2, he's going into Capernaum, into Galilee, and he's engaging with the gospel, and he's going to these different places even throughout the area, but he's doing that with his disciples. It's not just that he's doing the work, he's actually modeling to them. We even see him going into Peter and Andrew's mother-in-law's house and several different places where he goes into the oikos with his disciples, and he's modeling what it looks like to go and to engage. And he's even assisting them in how to engage their own oikos. So there's a model and assist in those key skills that they're going to need to be able to transfer to others. So if we're going to attract those multiplying leaders, we need to be able to model some real basic and clear skills of how to engage, for example. Number 2, Jesus, he did a lot of gospeling, a lot of proclaiming, but then also a lot of deliverance. We see these demonized people even coming to the synagogue as Jesus is proclaiming, and they're trying to expose that I know who you are, you're the Son of God, and he tells them to be silent, he commands the demons to leave. Well, we see him doing a lot of gospeling through proclamation and demonstration, but he's doing that in a modeling way with his disciples, and then he even begins to assist and watch them. So we go on back to Mark chapter 3, he has called those that he wants to himself. They might be with him, and he might send them out to do what? The very task that he's been modeling to them. So now they're going to go out and proclaim this gospel, and they're going to cast out demons. So it's not just that he's doing the gospeling, but he's actually modeling and assisting. So if we're going to attract those kind of multiplying leaders, we need to be modeling and assisting and watching and launching them in those core skills and even just practices of how to do that they can then turn around and do with others. So pretty important that we're doing that so that we can attract the right kind of people that will then build momentum as we attract others that are similar in that way. So then he also discipled. So Jesus did a lot of disciple making, we see, and he's calling people out from the crowd. So that means that there's a lot of other disciples around that are following Jesus around. He's modeling and assisting his disciples with these others that are around them and modeling how to call people to obedience and who to focus on that are actually obeying. Another phrase that I like from Lee Wood, he says, pour deeply into the few that will obey no matter what the cost. So we've got to identify who are those few that we're going to pour deeply into. And to do that, we need to have eyes to see what that looks like. So we've got others around us that are interested, and maybe they're interested for the wrong reasons. Who do we focus on as disciples? Jesus modeled pouring deeply into the few that will obey no matter what the cost. Well, he sees them among all of this crowd, and he calls them out, and he's doing that alongside of his disciples to show them who to focus on. So that really also he's modeling leadership development in that of who to focus on as the leaders. So we see that piece of the modeling. And then we also see him modeling church and leadership development. So let's talk about that. We see him modeling and assisting and watching and launching gatherings. So even before they've called it the church, and we see that phrase 2 times in the Gospels, right? But even before it's officially called the church in Acts 2, where that really emerges, they knew what to do in Acts chapter 2 because they'd been doing that with Jesus over the course of the ministry together. So they gathered often in houses. Mark 3 is a good example. They're in Jesus' home, and he says, this is my mother. These are my brothers, those that will obey the word of God. And so we see Jesus calling out some from the crowd and even beginning to model and assist to his disciples what the function of church is and who to focus on as being the church. So he models that. And then finally, we could say he models, assists, watches, and launches leadership development too. And one of the main ways that Jesus does this a lot is by asking a lot of questions. So he's doing a lot of skill development where it's high directive. Go do this. Go pray for this. We can think of Luke chapter 10, for example, where he sends out his disciples. He tells them what to do, what to bring, and what not to do. Don't greet anybody on the road. Do stay at the house if they open up and there's a son of peace there. And so that's very directive. But then you also find a lot of times where Jesus is asking a lot of questions. And so if we're going to attract those kind of multiplying leaders, there needs to be a mix of the two. We're going to identify the kind of leaders that will learn to grow into becoming a multiplying leader because they're going to respond to high directive feedback. Hey, go do this. This is what works. This is a best practice. But then we're going to keep those leaders by asking good questions and continuing to ask good questions. So it's not enough to simply hey, here's what we should do and direct those leaders. At some point, you lose them if you are not also asking good questions and continue to develop those leaders by helping them to apply what they've learned and becoming a sounding board and giving them advice and feedback as it's appropriate at the right time. So we see Jesus doing both of those things in his development of leaders. We should be doing the same. So all of that was a long explanation of point number 4 of 5 ways to attract multiplying leaders. Let's go to number 5, the last one. So we need to be praying for those leaders and investing into relationship. And so that might feel like not that exciting of a last point, but it's super critical. So please hear me on this, that if we are going to attract and keep and invest in the multiplying leaders, number 1, we need to be praying for them. So we need to be laboring over what God is doing in these leaders in prayer and praying specifically for the things that they bring up, but just also praying against the attacks of the enemy in their life and for what God wants to do in their life. And also, we need to be investing into them relationally. And you see that Jesus, he says this even back to that passage in Mark chapter 3, that he invites those out of the crowd to be with him. There is a huge component of leadership development and identifying leaders that is a with-ness piece. We need to have time with our leaders. This is how leaders become the kind of leaders that we can raise up and multiply, that we can so-called raise them up to shoulder height where they can walk in some of the same things that we walk in. You know, that is going to take a whole lot of relationship where we are connected and have enough trust, number 1, that we can speak into some of those challenges at those moments where a challenge needs to be spoken into. You don't do that in the moment when the challenge needs to be addressed if you don't have a whole lot of equity built on the front end of that through relational trust. So we've got to be investing time with those leaders to get to a point where there's trust built that we could have those kinds of conversations. So that's really important that we are investing relationally with leaders, and that piece of just being able to cry and mourn with those who mourn, but also celebrate and and be full of joy with those that are having a celebration season. We need to be able to do both. And when we do both, it builds the kind of relational dynamics that we can sustain in attracting those multiplying leaders and continuing to serve and help develop them. So we see Jesus doing these 5 things, that he is going about Galilee and in this work, doing each of these 5 things of a compelling vision cast, clarity of leadership development pathway, or doing the work, modeling certain skills and practices, and then also praying and investing deeply relationally with his disciples and leaders. And again, I think it's pretty critical that we have this conversation around leaders, because kind of a landing point on this conversation today, sometimes we will talk about what does it look like to see a big vision of the work, and we'll draw out this generational map of what God is doing through generations of disciples or even generations of churches. And as we draw that out, I like what a friend said. He said, the most important part of that generational map you see are the lines connecting those circles. Those lines are leaders. And so if we are going to see disciples make disciples, churches plant churches, it's going to take leaders raising up leaders that are those lines that connect generations together. So if we're going to see generational disciples raised up that accomplish that Great Commission, we've got to be investing in leaders. These are some ways you can attract them. So I hope this is helpful for you guys. I hope that you take this and that you begin to look around you for what you can begin to do in your life to be more effective at attracting and keeping those multiplying leaders. Bless you guys. Thanks for listening, for watching. If this content has been helpful for you, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us to get this content out there farther, to serve Jesus, grow his kingdom, and accomplish the Great Commission until there is no place left. Much love to you guys. See you next time.